I saw a werewolf with a Chinese menu in his hand.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the view of Wolfpack Research or any of its officers. The views and opinions expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on this program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. We are not investment advisors. We hold no registrations with the SEC, FINRA, or any other regulatory agency, and none of the opinions expressed on this podcast should be considered investment advice. The listener should assume that we have positions in and stand to benefit from any stock or other security mentioned on this podcast. Do your own research before making investment decisions.
All right, welcome to the Wolf Den, everybody. This is Dan David coming at you on a special kind of show. In remembrance and memorial of Matt Farrell, a member of the Wolfpack team since 2019, a member of the short community since really the dawn of time.
Forever, yeah.
We have, of course, the ever-present, can't get rid of, Sound Carl, who also had a really funny relationship with Matt to discuss, and some other very notable people in our community. You know, just in no particular order, starting top left, Roddy Boyd of, Surf, and he has broken some of the most major short stories in the recent decade. Valiant Pharmaceuticals notwithstanding, a few others. Insys was probably most important to me. Soren A. Andal. I joke with Soren. We can still have fun with Blue Orca. Done a great job since he started his own shop. Jacob Ma Weaver, who I know that Matt, thought of very, very fondly. And he's with Cable Car Capital. Maybe not somebody sees every day, but is very, very smart investor. Speaking of smart investors, we have Freddie and Carson with us. Thanks for joining us, guys, in their bat cave in Austin. That really looks like a nice place.
Public access television studio.
Oh, no. Stop it.
Well, it's a little better than the inflatable tree behind Dan.
That's real. That's what you're thinking.
That's law library at University of Michigan.
Yeah, that's right. There you go.
One.
And rounding it out with us is John Cheffers. He is one of our analysts and directs a lot of our research with Wolfpack and does a great job with us and has had a relationship with Matt since he's joined us. Just starting it out, I think people understand at this point Matt's no longer with us. And when people ask me about, how or why Matt passed, I think the simplest explanation I can give is that Matt died the way he lived, helping somebody that, not many other people would want to help. He was really remarkable that way. He would give you his last dime, really. And he was down to his last dime a lot of times. But, it really wouldn't matter to Matt. And I don't think we should dwell on that incident as much as just what a great guy he was. So, again, to put it on the spot, Roddy, you're top left in Hollywood Squares here. Maybe you could tell us how you came to know Matt. Probably so many years ago you forgot, but I heard an interesting story about you meeting him. You're one of the few people that he met up with in person a lot of times.
Yeah, I mean, Matt, I founded the Southern Investigative Reporting Foundation, berserk shoestring operation in summer 2011, and we launched, I think, in early 2012. Went after just an abusive, soon attempted IPO called it was Blythe. It was this ridiculous MLM, and I threw everything I had at it repertorially, and I got this. I launched the story, and then Jeffries and Company pulls the IPO, and I got this. Let's say it's a small term paper of a comment, from a reader. And I'm like, oh, Jesus, when you're a reporter, you get really used to these things. And it was just Matt, he was just announced as a freelance short researcher, and he hated multi-level marketing companies. And but it was an incredibly deeply thought out thing. And like, Dan and I talked about Matt several times since, we learned of his tragic passing. And Dan had one of the great lines, and I'm going to butcher it. So Dan, you got to be on your feet here, is, there was no subject like that Matt wouldn't be an expert in the arcane fringe of.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense, although it makes a lot of sense. I know like Carson, Freddie, and Soren and those guys, every Jacob who knew him, he had sort of been prompted to study the history of multi-level marketing in the U.S., which is just a catalog of crime. And he would send me these 5,000 word research notes on it, none of which you could use. But I mean, he really had become I certainly wasn't going to pay him. Yeah. I mean, he was studying, he got prompted to go to a lot of multi-level marketing companies. I'm not trying to be political or cultural, or I don't want to offend anybody, but a lot of these MLMs originate in Utah, and particularly with the predominant religion out there, which, Mormons just the most corrupt white people on the planet Earth. And so
not offensive at all.
Yeah, exactly. And so he tried to get I don't want to say infiltrate, but he was doing deep level, deep background research, in these temples. I don't know if he had the underclothes right.
I guarantee he did.
Yeah. You're right. If it was done in seersucker, you're right. And he would write these reports about, the people and the personalities and send them to me. And I'm like, this is 1/8 the most brilliant stuff I've ever seen. This is 7/8, late night AM radio, late night with what's that guy, Art Bell, you're driving late at night, people are calling in about abductions they've just witnessed, alien abductions. And I kind of fell in love with the guy, male crush then. And he found out that I did a master's thing in history in a previous life. And he was obsessed with special operations. He was in the Marines, and so he would, and
he was the least likely Marine you'd ever met.
Yeah, I mean, the most. Yeah. Top 10 people, you'd see in a crowd, and who is, Marine rifleman, and not him. But the second we would talk fairly regularly. The second to last time we talked, quite candidly, it was, I've shared often publicly about my struggles with addiction and particularly alcoholism. And, Matt was talking to me about, some of the stuff going on and he was facing with that relationship. But then the last time he talked, it was all about he had been approached by an English, kind of like an English black cube, and they wanted him to work for them to help understand the various players in the short community. He was fairly convinced it was Fraser, using an Oxbridge accent. By the way, I think that's
is a completely rational interpretation.
Totally fucking rational. That's absolutely on the.
You got to be kidding me, seriously.
Absolutely, it's on the table.
Okay.
It was just great, talking to him, and then a week later, obviously, I would leave this.
I heard the American accent sounds like John Wayne.
It sounds like John Wayne if John Wayne was trying to be a drunk John Fichtner. And
isn't that Ian Holland said?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and
we're
so
actually going to have him on our podcast, Ian Hollings.
Properly so. And so I just want to leave you guys. I would leave the audience with this. Just hit. Throw in Matthew Farrell and Charlottesville, VA into Google search engine. And, Matt astounded me. In all seriousness, let me just drop it real serious here. He was the most loyal donor Surf ever had. Wow. He sent $10 a month from the second or third month, a $10 a month check from the third month of March of 2012, the month prior to his death. And he he obviously never had 10 cents to rub together, and Dan's probably got 100 stories there. But you should Google Matthew Farrell, Charlottesville, VA, because he was so beloved of that arts and cultural community. And look, I know Charlottesville, all that's there is a good state school and rich people's horse farms. But I swear to God, he was the prime mover of 100 art gallery openings and probably closings, 200 coffee shop openings, and 300 pop-up, movie and documentary. I mean, he was having movies filmed on his property, and all those people got together in the comment sections of the Reddit Charlottesville subreddit and the alt papers in Charlottesville. And it was just people pouring their heart out. Artists who've never made it big, but owed Matt their life, and documentary filmmakers who, quite frankly, shit the bed. But, Matt held a grip for them. Rock bands, alternative bands that he worked as a roadie for his week vacation, when Dan wasn't whipping and driving him. I mean, the time he came to Wilmington, North Carolina, where I live, I was visiting, he brought his girlfriend with him, and she basically sat in the corner for an hour as Matt, they were walking to meet me at a coffee shop, and they found a band setting up at a bar, and Matt automatically became their best friends and started running wires into the, the rhythm guitar stack and the bass stack and the key, and it was just, they didn't have a roadie. So he worked as a roadie. So that's how I really, the first time I met Matt was I was hauling in bass guitars and snare drums for some shit band in Wilmington, North Carolina, a 7th level American city. And, Matt made best friends with them because he just loved people who put themselves out there. Look, I've gone on too long. I cut 2/3 of this. It's the deluded ramblings of a lunatic.
Oh, we're going to cut all of it.
I love the guy, and I'm bereft and bereaved, and I'm not going to get over it for a long time. Keep that in, okay?
No.
Thanks a lot.
And Rowdy, I didn't know he donated every single month. And
every month. My accountant called me, not to interrupt you. No. The Surf's bookkeeper called me, and she said, she's a nice old lady. She asked me where, the $10 was. And I told her, I said, Matt died, and she just started screaming. It was it was just, you could set, he got the 15th of every month, that $10 check came in, Yeah.
I mean, and when we talk about famously, Matt was behind the 8 ball financially for, all the time we saw him. He didn't work for a very long time after LexisNexis. He was just kind of on his own as a private contractor. So it was very, very spotty. I remember when he first started working for us, he was grateful after a couple of ideas. We're on the phone and we hear this banging, and he's like, "Oh, sorry about the banging, guys. I'm having floors put in." And I was like, "Oh, well, that's great. You're getting new floors." He's like, "No, I didn't have floors. I'm having them put in." And he really took pride in upgrading that property he had and finally getting beyond the 8 ball these last few years. But he, obviously couldn't get beyond a relationship. And he really loved being, a part of this community. And just a little bit about how Matt would sound when you talk to him. This is a Marine, right? When he talks about us, his quote, even on his LinkedIn page, you can go to it. "As the creeper that girdles the tree trunk, the law runneth forward and back. For the strength of the pack is the wolf, and the strength of the wolf is the pack." This guy talked like this every day.
I mean, I think you could really use that in a report, Dan, and I think that's what's been missing.
Yeah. He actually wrote some Harlequin novels, the Fabio things. Yeah. And I could see that in some of the things that Roddy's talking about. And I think everybody could say, the research that he would send, "God bless you, Matt. We miss you." But if I would ask for a background on a CEO, I would get a shotgun blast to the face of 500 pages of everywhere that guy went for his entire life. Rather than what's relevant. And I remember calling Carson one day and asking him, and I'm just like, "Carson, what do I do? I don't have time for all this. Like, I'm gonna have to come down now. He's going to have to change. And Carson's like, dude, don't change people like that. It's just, you go with it. You got to pick it out. You got to find somebody else to find the nuggets in there. And, I disagreed. And Carson was absolutely right. No matter how many times I talked to him, that never changed. He always sent us that shotgun blast of information. But thanks for your perspective, Roddy. And, I jump in again as you feel some other story pops up. Maybe Soren will jog your memory when he starts in and tells us about his relationship with Matt.
I was thinking about this. Were we the first people to hire Matt in this space?
Full time. I mean, in about like 6 or 7 years.
Yeah, we were because how did he come referred to us? Like, I feel like we had just moved to Austin. So it was like maybe like 13, 14. Like I think we were the first people to hire him full time in the space. I think maybe I don't know. Maybe Weichert found him dumpster diving somewhere or something like this, or shark diving. Weichert definitely found him. The funny story that I remember about Matt is our first interview with him. So we were pretty, to say that we were pretty new on the scene, and we were like pulling stuff together by our, pulling it up by our bootstraps is like an insult to bootstraps everywhere. Like we interviewed Matt. We flew him out to Austin. I don't know if any of you guys saw that first office that we had in out of that house. I mean, this is a place that like a junkie would be embarrassed to be in. Like it was just. It was just so
and I bet he did nothing but compliment it.
Oh my God, he was so excited. He like literally walks in, and first of all, Weichert's got probably like flip-flops and like a condom on from the night before.
That's Weichert. Yeah.
I was wearing rubbers back then.
Yeah, I'm obviously dressed very casually. This guy walks in for an interview, and it's the first time I've ever seen him. And Matt's got, he's got that perfectly coiffed, like kind of marine kind of haircut that he's had it for years, right? It's just the same one. He's dressed very like Southern Brooks Brothers kind of conservative, but very formally, even though we told him, hey, we're not like a formal organization. Yeah. So Matt walks up the door. What is a building that should, by all intents and purposes, be condemned? And he walks in, and it's this like shitty house with like a bunch of monitors in it. And Matt's just like, the first thing he says to us is just like, guys, it's so great to be interviewing at a proper hedge fund. Oh man, like who's gonna tell him? Don't say it. I looked at Weichert and I was like, dude, don't fucking say anything.
You're hired.
Yeah, you're in, bro. You're in. And I think Roddy's story is like that, really encapsulates Matt. He was like such an erudite guy. He was just the level of like inane detail, and we had no business hiring him. Like we were working primarily on Hong Kong ideas at the time, where his investigative skills were essentially kind of wasted, like because his access and his investigative work was just primarily useful investigating U.S. companies, and the level of just granularity, detail, and everything, it was just completely wasted on us. But, one of the nicest people that is in this space, and space kind of attracts its fair share of, what's the word for it? Characters? Like guys.
Assholes?
Yeah, like assholes.
Guys like Ian Hollings.
People with offices not as nice as yours.
Oh, there's a few guys with offices not as nice as those ones. No question. But Matt always stood out as someone who was just like one of the sweetest and most genuine people, in the space. And obviously a complete tragedy. What happened, but hilarious guy.
I mean, touching on what you talk about, like how you first meet Matt, just so you know, he wore a dinner jacket to the toilet. I mean, and it always had some kind of patch on the pocket. And in fact, when Wolfpack had their first meeting, he comes in and he's got patches for everybody.
Oh my God, that's right.
Wolfpack. I still have them over here. because, you know, quite frankly, none of us are going to fuck up a jacket putting a patch on it. but he had several of them with a Wolfpack patch. And it was, I think it's from his, you know, growing up going to, you know, the Exeter Academy or wherever he went. But that was him, a seersucker suit or, you know, a blue blazer with gold buttons on it or whatever. And super deferential. I mean, you'll read about things like he would do when he meets you, you'd almost bow.
He even wore that blazer when he went golfing.
He did wear the blazer when he went golfing. Yeah.
And he took a club from like 1910 and smacked that ball 300 yards with it.
He showed up with clubs that looked like they were right out of Bagger Vans.
Yeah.
I mean, the bag you could fit one hand around, you know, and he's like, oh, I got these out of the trash. He's like, these are great. You know, I've traced them back to the 1930s, and he's a terrible golfer. But at one point he takes a 3-wood that is, you know, half the size of your hand from back then, and he smacks it 350 yards. That's how it's done.
Damn.
Yeah. And he never complained. He just enjoyed being out there with people, you know. So Jacob, let's transition.
Yeah.
Well, what about you and Matt? Matt was always so fond of you. How did you have that spell over him?
Well, I feel like I'm going to echo Roddy a little bit. He started off as my pen pal as well. You know, when I had my one and only published research report and foray into the work you guys do on a regular basis before deciding I wanted to be more behind the scenes, you know, Matt wrote me out of the blue, and it was one of these long form missives with you know, beautiful choice of words and diction that just gave me pause and stopped me in my tracks. And I said, wow, I've got to meet this guy. And not dissimilar from Soren, you know, I didn't even have an office. I was working out of a 1-bedroom apartment at the time. So it was a long time before I could hire anyone. You know, actually here I am 9 years later with my first employees. So it's been a journey for me personally, but you know, Matt was one of the first people I ever worked with on something contract based. And, you know, since we had in common that lack of really excess nickels to rub together, we worked together on some investigative work for regulators that was done on a totally contingent basis. Like we put together some material. We knew 5 to 10 years later, there was a snowball's chance we might get some recompense from the government for our work.
And the snowball never showed up.
Yeah.
Well, people on this call have had varied experiences there. I'm sad to say the thing I worked with Matt on did not materialize, but it was one of those things where I actually, I'll mention what it was because I want to give him credit in a way that I know the government never will. But we did a lot of work on the binary options industry, as some of you know, and Forex platforms, unregistered CFD brokers, binary options brokers, and the like, before all of those shysters pivoted to crypto, was a big problem. And the government ended up bringing a number of enforcement actions against entities like Talinex, which was an offshore FX broker, Spot Option, which was the big white label platform for hundreds of these things. And what Matt did in his characteristic way, you know, 500-page shotgun blast to the powers that be, was really to list off well over 100 of those entities with an idea that, like, you know, putting it all together, figuring out who to charge for what conduct, analyzing the securities law violations or Commodities Act violations, that was a role for someone else. But actually putting together the list of places that people needed to be warned about, that was the priority. And how can we help the, you know, poor sops who are tricked into trading on these platforms ultimately avoid them? And I think the thing he would be really proud of, I know he was proud of, and I I would like the public to know is that the CFTC's Red List, which stands for Registration Deficient. I don't know if they would say so. I'm sure they had staff members who worked very hard on it as well. But I think Matt was instrumental in helping to bring that about and at least contributing 40 or 50 of the names that appeared on it. And I can't sit here and tell you how many people avoided putting their life savings on some of these platforms as a result. But if it was even one, I think Matt would have felt really good about that.
Yeah.
So that was a project we worked together on. But, over the years, I just got to know him as a person. And I think to Roddy's point, he really was a Renaissance man. I mean, we're here talking about him from the standpoint of people who worked with him in a professional capacity and this later in life hard turn that he took into the world of activist short selling. But, he was an artist and a writer and a musician himself. And, one day out of the blue, he sent me a soapstone carving that I have here. Of just a little wabi-sabi style, teacup that he made. And it was just one of the that I didn't deserve and really treasure now far more than I ever would have before. It actually makes me choke up a little bit every time I see it. But I brought it out for this just to share that. He was the kind of guy who would just do something like that out of the blue for a friend and let you know that he was thinking of you. By the same token, when some of his relationship troubles were at a nadir, he was someone who would always be thinking of others. And, I wasn't as close and in contact with him at the point in his life where things were worse, but it was the same sort of thing where out of the blue, when he was having a bad day, I might hear from him. And there was one day where very memorably, he wrote one of those, multi-page missives introducing me and another hedge fund analyst at a large fund who, we had a couple of things in common, but maybe not really. I think at the end of the day, and buried in the long email was just his way of saying, I had a really tough conversation recently. I don't want to talk about it, but the way I'm going to feel better about it is by connecting to people that I think will get along. And I think that really was his attitude towards the rest of the world. And it was always so frustrating to watch that sometimes that impulse got taken advantage of, by whether it was funds that he did some work for that maybe turned out not to be money good. I know that happened a few times before he was introduced to present company. To obviously some relationship challenges, but it was always with the best of intentions and sort of trying to make the world a better place. And I loved him for that, and I miss him terribly.
Well said. Well, we all do, and I know that. I know that feeling, and Matt and I had talked about that. And, the problem is Matt would, if you wanted to talk to him about any project, he would first offer to do the project, and then you just pay him whatever you want. And he would always, and I'd be like, Matt, you are just in the wrong business for that kind of model. How has it worked out for you? Terribly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but that happened to him a lot. And it was, he was taken advantage of in that way. But, Matt was never a victim. He just moved on with a good attitude. I wish I could do the same thing sometimes and just be positive about it and reach out to somebody like you when I'm having a bad day and saying, you know what, I don't want you to fix my bad day. I don't want to tell you about my bad day. Let me hear about yours. That's the kind of guy he was. So our newest member to the Matt Farrell relationship, John Cheffers, joined us this year. He's done a great job. And you get to know Matt very, very quickly. I know you probably know him less time-wise than the rest of us, but you've had some pretty good experience with him. Tell us about it, John.
Yeah. So Matt I didn't know Matt when I first interacted with him. Like I was just writing stuff.
Hold on, John, can I just ask?
Yeah.
Are you wearing a paperboy cap there, like from the 1930s or something like that, like a FUBU hat?
Newsies cap.
Because Matt would love that.
Yeah.
He would absolutely.
Yeah, he would.
He'd send you a patch for that.
That's right. He would. Yeah, he liked stuff like this. All I can say is, yeah, he liked all the old stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, Matt and I didn't know him at first. We started interacting kind of like over Twitter when I was writing stuff that wasn't like short activist stuff, but I was writing research for my last company, and he was always happy to share it, and he always thought it was very interesting. And then when I joined Wolfpack, I realized I was working with him, so that was cool. He was just a very funny person. Like it was always a little bit difficult for me to tell whether or not he was being completely serious when he was telling me certain things. It's like he'd tell you something, you're like, really? Like, for example, funniest examples of this is we're just on this call and Shkreli had just gotten out of jail, and Matt's like, oh yeah, like I was chatting with him the other day. I'm like, we're all like, wait, what? What do you mean you were chatting with him? He's like, oh, I started writing him when he was in prison just because I thought he might be kind of down, and I wanted to say hi. See what he's doing. And like we struck up a real friendship. We wrote like I kind of assumed that they were like writing.
You thought he was lying. You did not believe it.
I thought he was pulling my leg. I was like, are you joking? Like, what do you mean? You just started you just started sending jail mail to this. You see this guy, famous guy, goes to jail, and you just start writing him to just see how he's doing. Like I just couldn't believe it.
He actually did that. Yeah.
Yeah, he did. Like that was the crazy thing. Like he did do that. So that was pretty funny. And you guys are right. He was a very deferential guy. Like there was never like any sort of ego. There was never really any ego going on with Matt. He was never like jockeying for like position or power, trying to be like lorded over anyone that he's been around at the company longer or anything like that. And he was like that with almost everybody. But there's this really one funny interaction we had with this guy we were interviewing, this former who was working for this company. And you guys know how Matt talked about things. Like he would just make fun of stuff. Like he just thought it was garbage, right? Like he would just condescend about companies that did things he didn't like. He starts talking to this guy who used to work at this company. He's like, isn't it true that basically what all you guys do is you just got like saran wrap and an X-Acto knife and you're doing, like he's just like, isn't it true that like basically it's just like there's just some shabby garage. Like there's practically a homeless person living in this picture. Like I'm looking at pictures of this shabby garage. There's a homeless man sitting outside of it. How can you pretend that this is a real business? And he just starts railing on this guy. And I just was like, it was like one of the funniest encounters. I had to mute myself. I had to get off the phone. I was just laughing out loud so hard during this interview. I just couldn't help it.
Which is why Matt never did former interviews. He was really missing the point that that this former employee might not be the getaway driver. Not everybody is a conspirator. So leave it alone.
Exactly. So,
well, you got the gist of him quick, John. Man.
Oh yeah, no, he was great. And I don't even know if to include this or not. It's kind of crazy. Our last conversation was actually really funny. Oh gosh, there that goes. Our last conversation was really funny because it was actually the same conversation where one of the guys who was working with us had basically put in this notice like the prior week, and he was going to be around for another week, but he was leaving soon. And after Dan got off the phone, Matt just says to Reed and I, he's like with all the enthusiasm of like a kid at Christmas, he's like, whew, I outlasted another one. You wouldn't believe it, right? Oh, man.
Oh, look, when you say he's deferential, he would start out the call with an apology, sprinkle in about 10 of them as the call went on. He would apologize for being on time. He was never late, whatever it was. And, look, I'm not one to like call you guys all hours of the night or every single day, or certainly not him. But when I would, it would be right away. Am I doing okay? Is everything all right? Is there something you have to tell me? Yeah, Matt, I need you to do some work. Oh, great. It's just like, get the relief right out of the way. And that was for 4 years. Yeah, he was always happy to be there. But, a little unsure. I think he just got burned a few times in the mid 2010s to 2020 range. But yeah, very, very funny. I outlasted another one. He would remind me of his tenure once in a while. And I tell him how proud I am of him and that I'm going to get him a pin or a patch. So thanks for that, John.
Dan, did Matt tell you that he took about 1.5 acres of his backyard?
Yes.
And I let's just put scare quotes around backyard. And he recreated a section of British World War I trench.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I just want to make sure we had that out there.
I actually found that
as
out,
one does.
I found that out secondhand. There's some investigators we use who it kind of came up in conversation. They're like, oh yeah, we were in wherever it was in West Virginia, and then Matt traveled to see us, and I was like, oh, that's great. And they're like, oh, we had a great time with Matt. I'm like, yeah. They're like, oh, in the trenches. I'm like, what do you mean? What, the 4 of you guys got together and what do you do? Go to the World War I museum? They're like, no, he had us over to his house. I'm like, right, but the trenches. They're like, yeah, he's built life-size replicas in his garden.
Yeah, he has.
No floorboards either. He's.
No, they actually. I remember from the article. He would give out hot sauce in demilitarized grenades. And they found a bunch of them when everything went down. They found a bunch at his house.
With World War I trenches.
With World War trenches. So the news reports, they showed between 25 and 30 police vehicles there because they actually brought the bomb squad into his house because they were unsure what was going on in his house.
Yeah. The dogs got some hot sauce.
Yeah, they got hot sauce in a grenade.
Yeah. Look, he was a different guy, and I know Freddie, that's a cool story. You and Carson knew him well. I mean, actually, just to tell you, I reconnected with Matt after 4 or 5 years, showing up at your office, in 2018 or something, end of 2018 or beginning of 2019. And there he is in his seersucker suit, ready to go to this event that we're all wearing hoodies, to. And just that whole day, just talking to him, I thought he would make a good fit. And a lot of times he was. But he was at your office there, Carson. So I know you guys had some good experiences with him over the years. Tell us.
First of all, I mean, very selfless. And I think you've said this before, to a fault, right? When I think the first time we engaged him to do research, I don't think either of us had met him face to face. So we only knew him remotely, and he did a great job. I mean, if you want somebody to just dig into something online, he's great. I mean, yes, you drink from the fire hose on the other end, but after he did all this, he's just said, I don't need payment. I love this work. I'm happy to do it, without being paid. And we were like, come on, man.
Or electricity in his house.
No, I was like, dude, shut the flooring. This is so bad for me. What do you want about? I'm like, tell him you need to be paid more. Tell him you're really valuable to the process.
We were, it was just beside ourselves. Yeah. Like, no, man, seriously, we're going to pay you. What's fair? Oh, well, I don't need much. I think we had to name the price. We're like, look, man, will you take $5,000? And, on the back end of making that payment, he told you, he said, oh yeah, I was able to get hot water now. Thank you guys. And it was just like, you were volunteering to do this work and you don't need hot water?
Well, fuck you. I got him floors.
Well, I mean, if we're really,
what? He told me that too. Because, at the time, he was working with us and, sometimes he'd go on loan to friends, right? And he would ask first and whatever.
But that was a different time. And actually I wanted to talk about that one too. And that was Burford Capital.
Yeah.
And we had shorted this company. It was listed in the UK, run by just a complete group of douchebags,
Lawyers,
former
still is
former
run by douchebags.
Yeah, well, right, but former very top tier firm lawyers. I think even whiter shoes than where Soren used to work.
Impossible.
Ex-Wachtell guys, which they might have let you hold their legal jocks for him at Sullivan and Cromwell. But anyway, so I gotten a heads up that there was some discontentment within Burford over how the board meetings were always these luxury boondoggles, and I didn't really think there was much we could do to expose that, but okay, let me ping Matt and just set him on this. And, he's like, when do you need this? I'm like, look, man, it's not a rush. 36 hours later, this massive dossier, all of these social media postings from the wives and girlfriends of board members who went on these things. He's got itineraries mapped out. I mean, years of board meetings. He knows where they took place, what kind of wines they were drinking, what the leisure activities were. It was incredible. And I looked at him in astonishment. I was like, we weren't face to face, but I mean, I'm astonished. And I said to him, how did you do this in 36 hours? He's like, oh, well, I just kept going through. I was so engaged, and it was like 5 a.m. and I decided to go get 2 hours of sleep and wake up and start doing it again. And it was just, the guy was so dogged when he was onto something. And, and again, on the back end of that, he did the whole don't worry about paying me. I love the work thing. And, it's like, man, of course, it was great work. And that ended up being, we furnished that to a UK paper. I think it's kind of a tabloid. And they did this article just skewering Burford for being the luxury adventure travel club.
Right? Didn't they have a picture he found with them sat pictures around, somewhere in the Bahamas or whatever. Yeah,
with their luxury adventure travel club / board membership perks. So
the dogged work was just a hallmark of Matt. So there was a project we worked on, real shitbag business. It was these for-profit mental institutions. And I remember, I think, one of the things we were trying to look to do, there were these reports at an institutional level, and you could see how many incidents had been reported. So either deaths or serious injury or whatever. And they were reported at a state level, and it was maybe 50, 60 institutions. So we found 1 or 2 internally, went through them okay, this would be kind of cool to categorize.
Just to say, of course, this was bought by private equity because
bought and sold.
It needs to be made worse than it was.
And so what happened was I'd agreed, let's do 100 hours. And he was like, okay. And he called me back. And we're pretty used to you give something to an investigator and results are a little underwhelming. And you're like, well, yeah, I also could have gone on Bloomberg and found these 4 things out. And why has this taken 8 weeks? And he called back maybe 4 days in. It might have been 106 hours after the assignment was given. And he's like, Freddie, I'm really sorry. He goes, firstly, he'd done the full 100 hours, but he goes, I've had to stop because my power's down because the generator or whatever got hit by lightning. And he attaches a picture of whatever it was that was powering his house, like a crankshaft that had been hit by lightning. And I was like, again, the 500-page dossier, and it was awesome. It was it wasn't actually just drinking with the fire hose. It had been categorized as this institution, 8 deaths, 6 awful instances, 4 patient abuse, blah, blah, blah. And it was neatly categorized, and it was just an overwhelming body to the point where, and I think all of us can identify with this, a lot of people think short selling is really exciting. You sit around, you find all these you're sitting in the dark and you find aha, gotcha. And doesn't actually happen as often as people think. A lot of time it's hundreds of hours of work and some of it wasted. And he actually had the same dogged, rigorous approach to the hundreds of hours of grunt stuff that like a lot of us like spend a lot of time getting through. He did that with an enthusiasm that I think very few people were capable of doing. So I want to move on from touching on his work to his.
Well, I got to talk about the Broussard. Story,
yeah,
though.
so that was also awesome. The undercover stuff he did.
Yeah, well, so before I had met him in person, and when he first approached us, he talked about how he was a former Marine and said, if you ever need anybody to like sit in a bush for a week and surveil, like I would love to do that. So anyway, I had in 2015 we shorted this French hypermarket chain called Groupe Casino Guichard, and it was one of the wealthiest and most connected. It was run by one of the wealthiest and most connected people in France. This guy Jean-Charles Naury, and Naury like went hardcore at us. I mean, he has a reputation for just, the like going to war with each and every enemy of his. So at some point, we started getting these outreaches from a reporter at the Wall Street Journal in Paris, and these were going to our PR firm. And guy's name was William Horobin, and was asking for updates on what we were going to be doing with Casino and how the AMF investigation into us was going and things like that. And like the second or third email that our PR firm received, we realized that we were like, hey, these are all coming from Gmail addresses. So we checked, but there is a real Bill Horobin, who's a journal reporter in Paris. We had somebody kind of make a back channel check to find out whether he'd been sending these, and he's like, nah, I don't cover Casino. I have no interest. So we knew that we were dealing with an imposter, and almost certainly somebody that Naury had set upon us. So just hung back, over the course of a year and change. Whenever these inquiries came in, just sort of jerked the guy off in response. But then he said, hey, I'm going to be in New York. I would love to sit down and meet. And he was saying this to our PR guy. My PR guy, this was like a Thursday, and he tells me this, and I said, shit, why don't you tell him Carson's going to be in New York on Monday, and would be happy to sit down if you're interested. So the guy takes the bait, and now I'm like, whoa, I find it hard to believe the guy's going to be this stupid or arrogant, but I need some security. I'm like, all right, well, we've got this guy, Matt Farrell, who used to be a Marine. Like, why don't I, ping this guy and see if he'd be willing to come up and just be my security in case, some shit goes down. And Matt was immediately like, yeah, I'm there. But of course he starts giving me all these caveats about why he's not the right guy to do it. He's like, well, I'm very cartoonish, and I don't even know what the fuck that meant. Right. And, I just like, part of this is, look, you're the only guy I can think of who I can get there on short notice. And I didn't come out and say that, but anyway, so Matt comes up from Charleston and meets me at the hotel ahead of time. And yeah, he doesn't look like a Marine. It's like Roddy was saying earlier, right? Like this, just like, okay, well, all right, it's somebody, it's like
at this point, you're thinking, should have bought Freddie.
Yeah, it's taller than Freddie.
No, that's never an option, actually. That's never is.
But then Matt starts, I brought you some things, that you might want to use them for this meeting or later. And he starts handing me like all of these easily concealable weapons. It's like, the world's, it's like the world's most discreet blackjack. This baseball cap that has like a pouch sewn into it with lead balls in it, so you could also just use that to like bludgeon somebody. He's got this fucking arsenal that he lays out for me, and I'm like, all right, this is making up for it. So yeah, we did the meeting. And
well, wait, which weapon did you pick though?
Oh, well, the baseball cap wasn't going to work because I was in a suit, but yeah, I had and I still look, I still have some of these weapons like hidden around my house and also on my person. And, when I've got my backpack, it's kind of, job we do, right?
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah.
The world's smallest blackjack doesn't really, cause me any back pain.
You went with the sword phallus from 7.
That's just for you. So yeah. Anyway, he was there as security, and when I confronted Broussard after he just like asked, he just went right into it, wasn't subtle at all. Broussard kind of looked this direction. I had some other, like there was an FT reporter at the table next to him, but he looked at the FT reporter and thought that was security. He looked at Matt, saw security. I had another guy like up on the balcony there in the atrium at the Pierre, and then the dude just ran out.
And you all three lost him when he left the hotel.
Yeah, no, the only
you needed Freddie.
Thank you, Dan.
The only thing this guy had done, so the dude who was, who met me turned out to be a guy named Jean-Charles Broussard, who was actually one of France's top counterterrorism experts.
Oh. Apparently not.
He's like a serious guy. He had done one thing professionally, and that was he knew the exits.
Yeah.
He knew how the fuck to get out, and that's kind of why I guess the dudes that, balcony and at the entrances lost him. But anyway, yeah, that was my first time meeting Matt in person, and wasn't what I had expected. Definitely didn't strike you as a jarhead, but at the end of the day, he did show up with weaponry.
Yeah.
So
who would have thought Benoit balls on a baseball cap? You could just knock somebody out.
Touching on the weaponry, we were just discussing in the office the other day, the difference between insanity and eccentricity. And everyone's like, oh, well, if you have money, you're eccentric. And Matt is the only person I know without money that truly was eccentric.
In the coolest way.
Whether it's the World War I trenches that I found out about, I remember, Dan, I was once, you had like a little apartment, I think, you were using as an office in New York, and we were stopping by, and in the corner you had this taxidermy.
Oh my God.
Oh yeah.
So this was awesome. So Dan is a big animal lover, like a big. Sorry, I don't mean you love big animals.
Yeah, I know. I'm a big guy. Go ahead.
Around. Yeah. He's a big animal lover, and like Dan, I wouldn't picture you being a taxidermy guy. He's like, don't, man. Matt Farrell, I think, spent his last dimes on it, and the idea was it was going to be like a wolf, like the wolf pack.
Yeah.
But I think it was actually just a dog.
It was a coyote.
The guy was always sending gifts, like, and I would tell him, don't send me any gifts. I don't want any gifts. Like, something that would shoot tennis balls out my backyard so my dogs could go chase them. Very nice. And then he sends me this stuffed wolf, as he calls it.
Right.
It's a stuffed wolf. And I'm like, Matt, what is this? He's like, oh, that's part of the pack. It's a stuffed wolf. And I was like, okay, one, I don't know what wolf would want a stuffed member of their family staring at them all night. 2, I totally am not into any kind of stuffed animals, whether it's taxidermy or not. And 3, this is a coyote. You know how you can tell? It's like, 20 pounds. A wolf is like 200 pounds. He's like, oh, well, perhaps I can send it to somebody else in the pack.
That was his subtle way of throwing shade at your firm.
Yeah. Everybody knows, and all means whale's penis.
That's right.
That's why you're blue orca.
That's why you blew the orca.
Yeah. That was one of the first things he got. I could not believe and he had to know, like you would know, Freddie, that I would just not want something that was a dead animal, but there you go. Maybe he's just screwing with me.
He was a very, very sweet guy. He sent us a number of books and letters. He found out I was getting married, different to your approach, Dan, which was like, don't. He actually sent me a very nice personal email, and he was very sweet. And
I'll go on the record as saying I was right, but go ahead.
He was so sweet that, to be honest, when he first got in touch, and I'm not sure if it was Jacob who put us in touch or if he just got in touch, I was honestly a little taken back, because there are some people in this industry that are less scrupulous, and we're not generally in finance used to people who are very sincere and kind. And I sort of I had to reference him with a few people, because I was not used to being talked at in the sort of same in romance novel English. And he referenced very well, and I know lots of people thought of him very fondly. So it was just a very, very sweet, caring human being.
Yeah, he's not the kind of guy that talks Wall Street like, "Hey, you want to do deals? Let's do deals. We're going to do a deal."
No.
Total opposite.
Freddie's really saying he had to double check any reference from me. Like that was a little
I mean, you were in like a one-room apartment, right? Like, come on.
Yeah.
That's fair.
He thought you and Matt were pulling a scam.
He's like, this is a real step down from what Soren Ondel. They've got 3 rooms.
Exactly, yeah. With walls.
Lots of condoms that Weicker wears.
Well, look, I mean, you guys had a rich experience with Matt, and I know Sound Carl would want to say something because he was very tight with Matt, and I hope you can mumble through it without crying, because believe it or not, Carl's a very sensitive guy.
I am.
Yeah.
Men do have emotions, but I mean, look, Matt was just he was eccentric, but he was humble at the same time. And he just had such a unique story, and he could absolutely name drop with the best of people, but it was almost like John Carnes. You have to actually bring it out of him, right? It just comes up so casually in a conversation. One of the things that was amazing was he started his own cable TV show, much like the studio Carson, you and Freddie have there. And the house band was Dave Matthews Band before they became big.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So Justin, unbelievable. He leaves his private high school before he graduates and ends up going to college in France, studying French decadence and modern literature.
Yeah. At 17.
At 17. Didn't even have his high school diploma, but talked his way into French university.
Yeah.
By the way, this is the most prestigious high school in the North American landmass, Phillips Exeter Academy. Yeah. I mean, it's like, it's very fittingly Matt, like, yep, this is silly. I don't want to go to Harvard. Time for me to study something that's absurd. Yeah. Thanks. Goodbye.
Yeah.
Only Soren could have gotten into it among those of us here.
Soren toured it.
Yeah,
he's been there.
Didn't make his final cut. And then he ended up doing philosophical hermeneutics, British satire, and decadent literature at the College of William and Mary, rounding out with his master's from the University of North Carolina in medieval philosophy, literature, and diaries of World War I. And we wonder why he had a trench in his backyard and wrote Harlequin novels.
Yeah. We weren't kidding when Roddy wasn't kidding when we said he knew the fringe of every subject. I mean, all the way out to the end of it. And look, it's a big loss. It's a big loss to everybody. But, I would just end up by saying, our community will always miss him. But the new activist shorts getting in the business are really going to miss him, because he wrote, as you can hear here, he wrote a note to all of them. Their first report or whatever, or even if a report didn't go well, he knew, every anonymous kind of short seller that was just coming onto the scene and would offer to help them. And, I have to tell you, I just don't think that person's out there anymore that I know of. And that hurts the community. So having said that, if you're thinking about starting your own activist short shop, call Jacob. Call Freddie. They're Mitch's.
Tell you how bad of an idea it is.
Yeah. So look, if we're going to release this on the shortest day of the year, if you don't realize that you're hearing this on the shortest day of the year, then take a short minute, and think about people who just really wanted to impact other people's life positively. That was Matt Farrell, and he'll be very much so missed. Any last words from anybody else?
Yeah, Dan, I actually thought you could cut this if it doesn't fit or slot it in somewhere else. But
God, I've heard that so many times. Go ahead.
I could read that Corey Cold poem if you guys liked it. I know we exchanged it over email earlier.
Jacob, why don't you go ahead and just sign us off reading that poem that Matt Farrell sent you? That would be. I think he'd like that.
Great, I'll do that. So for those not familiar, Keurig was Green Mountain Coffee Roasters was a battleground stock. Widely shorted and ultimately acquired, caused a lot of pain for some people, but others with better timing, maybe less so. But Matt found the humor in it, and he wrote a poem which he entitled Cold, about their Keurig Cold product, which was much hyped and overly so. Should you lack for what to drink, approach that dingus by the sink. Take your water sugared bold from this modest of cons, Keurig Cold. Now it's Friday, a hot young date. Mustn't she crave to wet her palate? Are you man or mouse of the wold? Dazzle her with your Keurig Cold. Arriving home from pure all sport, kids line counters in mad cavort, scorning Kool-Aid when they're pulled. Come on, Mom, we want Keurig Cold. After a day of toil and strife, rejoined at home are man and wife. Love soft nest, having to hold, bound by the ring as by Keurig Cold. No more Red Bull with bottle or can is like Promethean fire to man. Humanity advances, future to hold, pod to destiny with Keurig Cold. And the final stanza, I think in some way, really Matt was foretelling his own future. All a life you've worked and rolled with such punches as fate foretold. Now at the end, all's safe in the fold. Reward is sweetest from Keurig Cold.
How can the world not miss a man like that?
That's so great.
And I know that just absolutely crushed some funds. So that's kind of funny too. Hey, look, from the bottom of my heart, I really want to thank you guys. I mean, you guys have all made this easier on us too. The kind words and the reaching out and, letting us talk a little bit and cry on your shoulder, so to speak, or literally. So, from all the guys at Wolfpack that are here and that, just couldn't join because it was a little emotional. Thank you. Thank you very much. And to some of the listeners who wrote in as well. Thank you very much. And
thank you, Dan. Thanks for putting this together.
Yeah, this was a great idea.
Thank you for doing it.
I feel a lot better. Thank you.
Great. All right, guys. Well, the next one's going to be more upbeat. Our next podcast will, I'm sure, revolve around destroying a fraudulent company, which I always find more upbeat. If not here on Zeros, that's always fun to listen to and see. So join us back in those forums and for those reasons. And that would be a great thing for Matt Farrell.